Hey everybody, this is Will with Gruene Records. Today we're going to be looking at a few different miking techniques for acoustic guitar and kind of to give you an idea what your options are, what your tools are, how you can use them, and what your goals can be. First technique we're going to be looking at is just a mono mic positioned right on the guitar. This is going to be used mainly when you're just mixing it into an already existing song. It's not going to be the center of attention. You just want it to fit in nicely, not take up too much space either in the frequency spectrum or the stereo spectrum. When you're picking a position for just a mono mic, there's not too much to think about. Just how bright or dark you want the sound. The more you point towards the sound hole, you're going to get a darker sound. The more you point towards like your 12th fret, getting towards the neck more, you're going to get a brighter sound. Ultimately, with that, you're either going to be getting more sound from the body of the guitar itself versus just the strings as you point more towards the frets. Helping us demonstrate these techniques today is our good friend Cody Angel on the guitar. So, when you're choosing to do a stereo miking technique, there's usually a couple of things you're going for. One would be creating space in the stereo field. You can have more options. You can create space in the center for vocal or other things you might have pan center, and you'll have them fighting less in the stereo field. Second, there is a dimension and a depth added when you're miking, when you're putting multiple mics on a source. The exact way that depth and dimension happens will depend on the technique. But ultimately, stereo mics give you more dimension, more depth, and will give you more options with panning and distinguishing things from each other in the stereo field. The first technique we're going to look at and listen to is the XY miking technique. The basic principle of this technique is that the mic diaphragms will be coincident, which just means that they'll be as close together as possible, so that there aren't any issues with the sound arriving at the mics at different times. But any sound source is going to be hitting both mics simultaneously. The angle you use on the XY can vary, but I have a particular goal when miking a guitar with XY that ends up kind of determining the angle for you. When I'm positioning the XY, I'll be pointing at the kind of the wooden parts of the guitar on either side of the strings, known as the bouts. I'll point one center of the upper bout and one center of the lower bout. When you point your mics at either side of the strings like this, at each bout, you'll find that one mic tends to pick up the bass strings slightly more, and one picks up the treble strings slightly more. Generally with this technique too, you're placing the mics fairly close to the guitar. You're not getting a lot of room, you're just getting a lot of direct sound. Largely the effect I'm going for when I do a close miking with an XY is one to exaggerate the left-right as much as I can. The effect you'll find this technique has is creating some movement in the stereo field between the treble and the bass strings. This is similar to if you're like miking a piano, for example, where you'll mic the strings on the far bass and treble ends separately, and you'll find that there's movement. It won't be quite as strong as on a piano since you're actually talking about a large amount of space there, but you'll find a subtle shift in where the energy is. Another pretty integral part of this technique is that the mics are close to the guitar. You don't want to get too much room sound in this technique. Typically, my goal, if I'm doing an XY technique like this, is to kind of give a larger-than-life sound, an exaggerated sound that's more than just hearing a guitar in a room with you, but really feeling it move around you and just be full and present. When I'm using this technique, one of my main goals is just to fill up as much space as possible with the guitar. I don't want it just living in one little area of the frequency spectrum or the stereo field. I really want it to take up a lot of room and just on its own be big and full. second stereo miking technique we're going to be looking at and listening to is going to be the spaced pair technique. This technique is not going to be insanely different from the XY, but one of the main differences you'll find is that this one is getting an image of the guitar more as a whole. When positioning things, the main thing to keep in mind is that the center of your image should be equidistant from both mics. You can use either a tape measure or even just a cable or something. Measure out where you want the center of your sound to be coming from and making sure that both mics are the same distance from that point. With two mics, you'll be able to have a similar thought process as you would have with a mono mic when you're thinking about your dark and your bright tones, except you can have both. How wide you want these mics to be is up to you. The main thing to keep in mind is that as you move them wider, you're going to find there have more and more difference between them and more difference in your left-right signals. The one positioned more towards the body is going to become continually darker and less detailed in terms of brightness. Anything you're moving closer to the neck is going to get more and more just string noise. This technique has the most potential for your left and right sources to be very different, so you want to keep an eye on that. That can be a really cool effect, but it's also easy to overdo. So just play with it and do what sounds good to you. Ultimately, if I'm reaching for a spaced pair technique, it's because I want to maintain the presence and the fullness of having a stereo guitar while maintaining a bit more of a natural sound compared to the XY, something that's more similar to how you'd hear the guitar in the room. The last technique we're going to look at and listen to is the mid-sides technique. Brief explanation of this one. The mid-sides technique uses two mics, one cardioid and one bipolar or figure-8 pattern mic that picks up off the front and the back. When you're setting up a mid-sides, you'll take your cardioid mic, point it right at your source, and the figure-8 you'll place coincident with that as close as you can, except you'll put its pickup pattern perpendicular to the direction you're pointing. When you're positioning your mid-side setup, you're going to have a similar thought process as you would with your mono mic, except now you're just going to have the figure-8 there as well, which is going to allow you to mix in the room sound. One additional step you'll have to do with the mid-sides technique is some post-processing. What you'll do is you'll take the audio from your figure-8 mic, whatever you're using, and you'll actually duplicate that track, phase reverse one, and then hard pan both left and right. The result of this is the center image will actually cancel out between these two mics. What's common between them phases out. And you're left with just a side signal, which effectively, in this case for us, is our room, which is what that mic is picking up. This technique gives you the ability to emphasize the direct sound of the instrument and of the room and the space you're in separately, and you can treat them separately, and it gives you a little bit more control as far as what you can do with it. This technique could be used on anything, not just acoustic. It could be on your acoustic, on your vocal. It could be a room set for your drum mics. It could be anything, but ultimately, if you're reaching for this tool, it's because you're in a space you love and you want to bring attention to it. One other thing you can consider is whether or not you'd like to use a DI as well as mics. Most often, anytime I'm able to use a DI, I will throw one in the chain, but often I end up not using it. With DIs, you get a very unnatural sound, or one that's very unfamiliar, as typically you aren't inside of a guitar when you're listening to a guitar. So while on their own, DIs can not be too great and just be very unnatural sounding, they can actually add a lot if blended into mics. Because the source of the DI is always actually inside the body of the guitar itself, it can add a fullness and a resonance that doesn't quite exist outside the guitar or in the room, and can be a real great tool if mixed in. Here are some examples with actually what we had just heard with mics on their own of what those sound like with a DI blended into them. Obviously, there are a whole lot of other factors that determine what your recording is ultimately going to sound like. From your mics, your mic pre's, the type of instrument, and a lot of other factors. But I really hope that in terms of understanding your tools when it comes to miking techniques, that this video has helped you get a clearer picture of what your options are. Keep an eye on our channel for more videos like this one, and if you have any ideas for videos, something you want to see or learn more about, let us know in the comments.